7 o'clock, we'll call this meeting to order and rise to the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Nice to have you all here. First item of business will be our public comment period. We allow 2 minutes per speaker, up to 10 minutes total, to address the board regarding any subjects that you wish. Would anyone like to speak? And we all know the drill. I have to ask 3 times. Would anybody like to speak? No, I'm going to have to do it 3 more times because you did that.
Well, I was trying to be courteous and, let all of our guests have a chance, but I didn't see anyone, rushing up here.
Okay.
Well, good evening, everyone. I'm Bob Bamanick, the county recorder. I'm also recognition chair for the Winona County Fair. And I wanted to just let you know real quickly this evening that we received lots of very positive news coverage on the Century Farm recognition and the Winona County Fair in its entirety. The local news media, and we have several here tonight, thank you, excellent job. Several area news reporters, our articles have appeared in several of the weekly papers already. And the Agri News had a very, very nice coverage on the fair, family farms, as did the Associated Press. All ran articles, and the topic was the pride in the family farm. And that certainly is key to our 100-year recognition. We recognized 3 this year. Now we have a total of 177. A party that attends our fair every year, I visit with him, but he also attends all the other fairs in the area, told me that the most enthusiasm by the fair board members and the fair goers is here at the Winona County Fair. And I think I can maybe vouch for that in just a small way. Thursday evening when I was parking cars, for 2 hours straight, we did not have an open spot in the fairground parking. We had people backed up into the residential neighborhoods. And that evening, I've done this for years, I have never seen the turnout. So I think it was a huge compliment to our fair for the program that evening. And of course, the weather was just exceptional. So commissioners, thank you for participating and honoring those that received recognition and being in the congratulatory line that was noticed by the public. There's been a lot of compliments for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you.
Anyone else wishing to speak before the board? Anyone else wishing to speak before the board? Last call. Anyone else wishing to speak to the board? Hearing none, we'll move to our next item of business, which is the approval of county board minutes for the meeting on July 11th, 2017.
Approval.
Second.
We have a motion by Commissioner Jacobs, seconded by Commissioner Kovesi, to approve the county board minutes of July 11th. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, motion carries. Consent comments and approval of agenda. Mr. Fritz.
I don't have anything.
Commissioner Kovesi.
I have some comments at the end.
Okay. Commissioner Ward.
One thing that to be added to our calendar, please.
Okay. Commissioner Olson.
Nothing for me.
Commissioner Jacob.
One comment.
One item, sir?
Yeah.
Okay. County Attorney Sonneman.
Just one or two, but they're related.
Maureen Holsey.
No, I've already talked to Jim about it. We'll deal with it when we get there.
Okay, approval of the agenda.
Also move.
Second.
Motion made by Commissioner Ward, seconded by Commissioner Kovesi to approve the agenda as written. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion carries with all voting aye. Consent business, Mr. Fritz.
All right, I'll read the consent business into the record. 6.1, approve monthly resolution. 6.2, approve agreement with Winona County Attorney for legal services. 6.3, approve 2017 subsurface sewage treatment system upgrade grant agreement. 6.4, approve resolution for LG 214 premise permit applications, Rolling Stone Firefighters Relief Association. 6.5, approve resolution for Minnesota Trail Assistance Program. 6.6, approve resolution appointing Jill Johnston Winona County Community Health Services Administrator. 6.7, approve donations received from 4/1/17 to 6/30/17. 6.8, set 2018 budget, TNT, Truth and Taxation, and fee schedule public hearing date as December 12th, 2017. 6.9, confirm payment of disbursements. I believe that concludes the list of the consent agenda.
Does.
Move approval.
Second.
We have a motion by Commissioner Jacobs, seconded by Commissioner Olson to approve the consent business as presented. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion carries. The consent business is approved. We will now move to general business. First item is to receive the 2017 members report from Minnesota County's Intergovernmental Trust. From someone.
Close.
I'll do it.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Color. You could have carpooled.
Oops.
Well, good evening, Commissioners. I'm Bob Gady, and I'm the Risk Management Consultant for MCIT. Thank you for your time this evening on your agenda. I want to start by reminding all the MCIT members of the mission, and that is providing Minnesota counties and associated members cost-effective coverage with quality risk management services. The reports to the boards now are on a 2-year rotation, so we are not doing these reports every year. What we're trying to do is get out and talk with our newly elected commissioners and getting them familiar with MCIT. We don't have to go into too much of our history lesson tonight, seeing none of you were newly elected this year. We'll get on with an important development going on at MCIT. The board wanted everyone to be aware of a longstanding contract with an independent vendor called Meadowbrook Insurance that will be ending at the end of 2017. Their services then will be brought in-house, and there will be necessary employees brought in for the services of property casualty claims and the member services. And that's the people that update all of your schedules and keep the MCIT books up to date. At the same time, MCIT will be bringing in a new software platform, as we have many different services out on different types of software, and bringing everything into one software platform. That will be a great benefit both for employees and for members, because we'll have lots of good information right at our fingertips. Benefits of pooling, we have an extended list there on the bottom of page 2. You're probably pretty familiar with a lot of those. The one that I really want to highlight is the tailoring of coverage, because there was an important coverage change that took effect January 1st of this year, and that was to enhance the coverage provided for data compromise and cyber coverage. What MCIT decided to do was partner with Hartford Steam Boiler. That is the same company that we work with to insure boilers and air conditioners and all that, but they are becoming a real expert in the area of cyber and data compromise. So their plan was a very good one for us to partner with. So as of January 1st, there are 4 distinct coverage lines in the data compromise coverage. Each area has $50,000 worth of coverage. So there's coverage for first-party expenses if you have a data compromise, meaning expenses at Winona County that you will incur. That data compromise could end up in a liability claim, so then another $50,000 would apply to that. You could have an actual cyber attack, Probably one of those that you're familiar with other counties getting hit with is that infamous ransomware. And that is part of this data compromise coverage now in the cyber area. And then a liability area if that cyber attack ended up in a liability claim. So 4 distinct areas of coverage and $50,000 applying to each one of those coverage areas. Going ahead to page 3, just want to give you an idea of what kind of claim activity is happening at MCIT. So these graphs are giving information on the trust as a whole. So if we look at the first one being claim frequency, our most frequent type of claim involves an automobile. Every claim, though, that comes in on a distinct automobile is registered as a claim. So it does build up to be quite a few. Even if they're a glass claim or a fender bender, that's an auto claim. And keep in mind, with all of the MCIT members, there's approximately over 9,000 vehicles around the state. This time of year, there's a lot of hailstorms going on. And all year round, we have lots of deer that like to run into our squad cars and other vehicles. So it does make sense from a frequency standpoint that we're going to see a lot of automobile claims. If we go down to the bottom chart, severity represents the dollars that are paid out. And you see that automobile shrinks quite a bit, which makes sense because if a windshield claim can be settled out, if it's minor damage to a vehicle, so can that. But if your claim involves a building, such as property, those claims tend to be larger, so that percentage has jumped up, and along with liability. And we're giving you 4 distinct areas of liability there. The general, which would be more of a slip and fall, public employee liability for the lawsuit type of protection, law enforcement liability, and then land use. So with liability claims, they do tend to last longer. They likely will have defense costs involved, which are part of the claim, and ultimately there could be a settlement. So it does make sense that those are the higher in the severity area. All right, if we move on to page 4, same type of graphs, frequency and severity, number of claims and dollars paid out. Here we're showing you where the trust sees most of the workers' compensation claims. The 2 charts really don't change too much because we see kind of some distinct areas where more of the work comp claims come from. And again, those charts represent MCIT as a whole organization. If we look at the top areas, sheriff jail operations, highway, if you do have a healthcare facility, social services, those are mainly jobs that are out in the field. There's more exposure to them. So it does pretty much comes along with the territory that there's going to be more work comp claims in those distinct areas. Interesting that still a very common type of work comp claim involves some type of slip and fall activity. What happens with a slip and fall, it could injure an arm, an elbow, a back, a shoulder. So there's lots of different things that just a general slip and fall could cause an injury to. The trust is keeping a closer eye on a distinct area in the sheriff operations work comp, and that is in the training. We do see a significant amount of the sheriff claims being in that training area. So it is something we really want to keep an eye on. Hopefully our new loss control consultant in the law enforcement area will be a benefit in that area. But something to keep in mind that even if you do bring in volunteers in the sheriff operation for training purposes, those volunteers are protected by your county's workers' compensation coverage. More specific to Winona County, on the bottom of page 4, workers' compensation does have the component of loss rating, meaning we do look at the individual experience for each member. What we calculate then is called an experience modification factor. That is abbreviated in that middle box called MOD. It does get recalculated every year, looking at 3 full years of experience. So the experience mod calculated for 2017 will look at experience from the years 2015, 14, and 13. Now you do see an uptick there going over that 1.00 or kind of that general expected area. This year, bringing in the losses from 2015 did bump that mod just slightly over 1.00. I did talk with your loss control consultant and your work comp adjuster, and they feel they do have a good understanding of what happened and how those claims are going to be worked out, but it is currently affecting that modification factor this year. All right, any questions on that before we move on? Okay.
Well, I'm sorry, Bob. So now we're going to pay more on the bottom of page 4. We're going to pay more. And you always compare 3 years. But those 3 years, 15, 14, and 13, were well below the 1 point. So how do you average them up?
Only
Something?
one year rolls off each year. So 13 and 14 and 15 become cumulative. Then now next year, the lower year will drop off. But that was
Right.
a combination of.
So it's not an average of those 3 years. It's calculated bringing in 3 distinct years. So 2015 obviously did bring in some significant claim activity.
And the mod is
So just-
calculated over 3 years, so you don't get an aberration.
Right.
Yeah.
So what kind of incident threw us into that higher, for example? What was it in a general terms? Was it a car crash, or was it a slip and fall, or?
I'm not aware of the distinct claims. Joe, do you want to?
I don't know if we can say it was any one, but I do know we had some that were more severe back injuries and then also shoulder injuries. Those seem to be, I think, the ones I can recall right now that probably helped us out.
Okay, all right.
Thank you.
And then, but then you also sent and then you will go to page 6 that you talked about sheriffs and things being unfortunately maybe higher incidents. Does that peace officer accredited training help with claims? Does that anything relate in that training to?
No, not
Job
distinct
safer?
to that training.
No, okay.
No.
Okay, all right. Just thought maybe if we signed up for that, we'd help ourselves out.
It could, but I mean, they have to obviously get their credits somehow.
Right.
So
But
they're
it's
looking
not a
at different.
class related to
No.
how to arrest
Not related
somebody
to safety, no.
safely without tearing your shoulder out or something. Okay.
All right, on page 5, I want to talk about some of the financial areas for MCIT. Of course, the board is always looking at and wanting to keep your trust very financially sound. So the first thing we need to look at in that kind of overall area are rates. Now, keep in mind that all members of the trust receive the same base rates, and the only type of area that is distinct to Winona County is that workers' compensation area. Otherwise, base rates are the same for all the members in the trust. Note that there has been a rate reduction in the areas of property, casualty, and work comp over the past 3 years. And there was a fairly significant one in 2017. Pretty good experience in the property area, but one of the other real driving factors was in the liability area. And a reason for a rate reduction there was a lot to do with the closing out of claims in that area called DPPA, or Driver Privacy Protection Act. About 4 years ago, there was a rash of claims coming in when people found out that their private data was looked up without a business reason. Claims were submitted. Quite a few of them were closed out with no payment because there was no type of damage to the person, other than they were mad that their information got looked up. So a significant number of those claims have been closed out. Yes, some of them were kind of nasty, and there were some fairly big settlements made. The claims that do remain open are being still adjusted at this time, but reserves have been already set aside for those claims. So from a liability standpoint, our actuary felt that we could take quite a rate reduction in that liability area. So that was good news from a rate standpoint. In the area of reinsurance, now that's one of the major expenses to the trust, because we do need that safety net in case of a large catastrophic claim. So $500,000 is the threshold in all areas: property, liability, and workers' compensation. After the first $500,000, a claim would go on to a reinsurer. Now, in property and liability, the trust looks at the marketplace every year and works with a broker to see what type of reinsurance can be obtained. We do have quite a long-standing relationship with Munich Re. So that was renewed with Munich Re under the liability. The board did decide to make a change in the property area due to seeing the same type of good coverage that they had in place before, and a 14% rate reduction for the cost of that property reinsurance. So it was moved to Hartford Fire. Work comp reinsurance, all insurers in the state must belong to the WCRA. So not too much choice in that area, as it is mandatory to belong to them. Now the dividend discussion. You're all familiar with that dividends do have quite a history back to 1991. But do note that the numbers have dropped down quite a bit since 2012. And there are a few reasons for that. Not so much from the claim area, quite a bit from the investment area, and you see that the trust has dropped those initial rates. So that means that there is less money coming in on the contribution end, so you're not paying as much upfront. But the dividend, that does affect the dividend going down. In other words, you get to keep money longer. So in the long run, it's a benefit. The investment side, I think you're pretty familiar with how that has dropped off, because MCIT must use the same practices as you do at the county and other public entities. The 2017 dividend has been announced, a total amount that is at $11 million. And your, we made this chart a lot before the 2017 numbers came out, but I think you saw a bulletin article that the announcement was made for $11 million for the 2017 dividend. Your actual then Winona dividend, you'll be receiving the dollar amount probably in about a month or so. All right, moving on then to page 6. Loss control services. Brian Dowdy continues to work with Winona County. I know he works directly with Jill, and they have a great relationship. I always hear lots of activity going on. But Brian is kind of that point person for working with your safety committee, doing building inspections, walkthroughs, that type of thing. MCIT also hired a new loss control consultant specific to law enforcement. So I know Keith Turness has already met with your sheriff's office. He's in his first year, so it was pretty much getting familiar with all the sheriffs in Minnesota. And his background was the former police chief in Fargo, North Dakota. So he already does know quite a few of the players in Minnesota, and we feel that will be a great addition in the loss control area. Risk management, of course, services that we provide, the coverage reviews, working with your department heads in a risk management meeting, and then just day-to-day your questions that come in concerning MCIT. Commissioner Ward, let me explain Patrol then. That is a peace officer accredited training online. It's an online program that we partner with the League of Minnesota Cities and the Sheriff's Association. So it's a way for deputies to keep their accreditation up. It's a choice if the county wants to use it or not, but we feel it's a good way to save on expenses because it is something that's offered online. But of course, your deputies would have to obtain the training somehow, so they're just looking at it from a different avenue. The Employee Assistance Plan, also part of your MCIT membership. There we partner with the Sand Creek Group. And what the EAP does is to offer counseling services. It's available to officials, employees, and all family members. This year they are offering a training called Resilience 2. So if there's interest in that, that can be scheduled for any time in 2017. One of the trainings up on top of the page, the Balancing Leadership and Risk. That's a continuation of the new commissioner training that was held in January. So, of course, it's open to anyone that would want to attend, but it is meant more for the new commissioners that were newly elected this year. Defensive driving, that is done through the Minnesota Safety Council. It's available, obviously you used the training last year. It's available in either a classroom setting or online, and it's something that is available every year. So if you do want to have it again this year, you certainly can. But glad to see that you use that service through the Safety Council. Keep an eye on our website because there are other trainings coming up. One of the very popular ones will be the middle of September, and that is the annual land use seminar that will be held in St. Cloud. So that pretty much wraps up what I have. So on behalf of the MCIT board and staff, thank you for your continued participation with MCIT.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm glad my, speaking of you charging us too much and giving us too much back is resonated in a lower premium and a lower dividend. Thank you.
It was a message that was heard.
Thank you and have a great day.
All right.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you.
Say hi to Robin.
I will.
Next item is 6.2. Mr. Keith Carlson, Executive Director, will present the annual update for MICA, Minnesota Intercounty Association.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am Keith Carlson. I'm the exec with Minnesota County Association, Minnesota Intercounty Association. With me this morning, or this evening, it's been a long day, are Nancy Selesky, Steve Novak, and Ryan Erdman, who'll follow me to the podium, and then I'll have a few closing comments. It's a pleasure to be here once again. As at least some of the older members know, we always do a Southern County swing. We were in Homestead County earlier this afternoon, and as is our tradition, we had dinner at Jefferson's before joining you here. So I sort of enjoy that. I'm going to start out with sort of a financial overview of what the session may mean to Winona County. To start off with, you'll notice that I titled my portion of the presentation as The Good, the Bad, the Ugly. The good is that there was substantial additional dollars coming Winona County's ways from several aid programs. One of those it can be attributed in part to the efforts of Senator Miller, program aid increase of $193,000. Senator Miller was the chief author of the program aid increase, and he responded to the concerns that I raised with him As you all know, this incorporated the new formula that had been advocated by AMC as well as our organization, but I made it clear to him that it would not work unless at least $25 million was appropriated for the program. Otherwise, Winona County would have lost on that. That was heard, as well as heard over on the House side, and as a result, the county is looking at an increase rather than a decrease. ICWA stands for Indian Child Welfare Act. The cost of out-of-home placement will be partially subsidized at a cost here in Winona County of about $3,200. Riparian aid, now that the county has given notice that it will accept jurisdiction to enforce the buffer law, means that you will be getting nearly $72,000 this year. And in 2018, going forward, under current law, will receive nearly $90,000 annually for your cost of enforcement. There are increased funding for DOC probation services that are provided for individuals on probation in your counties, and Ryan will touch on this a little bit more. Good news for your commercial industrial properties is that the first $100,000 of the value of their property will no longer be subject to the state tax. So they can be looking forward to some relief in that front. And finally, there are no levy limits or no reverse referendums on possible levy increases. So that's good news for you. Your financial fate is really in your hands. The bad is that despite the hype, the transportation funding proposal that did ultimately pass the legislature, as Steve will go through in more detail, really provided relatively little money to counties. In total, for all 87 counties, about $23 million will be provided next year, and $25 million in 2019. Winona County's estimated share of that is $250,000 for 2018 and about $270,000 in 2019. There was funding provided for the bridge bond program. Beyond what was dedicated to specific projects is about $41.5 million that's available for competitive grants that the individual counties can apply to for their bridges needing replacement or rehabilitation. The local road improvements, somewhat the same. Beyond the dedicated dollars, there was about $26.5 million made available for the competitive grant program. The local road wetland replacement program was one which we expended a lot of effort on because, as at least some of you probably know, the Bowser had given notice at the end of last year that they would no longer be meeting the state's obligation to pay for the cost of wetland replacements on existing road projects. We were able to get $5 million in cash as well as some regulatory relief relatively early in the session. But disappointingly, the third leg of that, bonding to basically recapitalize the banks that are necessary to meet this obligation, only was done at a $5 million rather than the $10 million level. So that's certainly going to be on our agenda. Really, the biggest winner in terms of transportation funding was the state system, which was authorized the issuance of $940 million of trunk highway bonds for state trunk highways only over the next 4 years. All this kind of reinforces the notion that the steps that you've taken to basically rely on your own sources of funding is apparently the direction that you will have to take in order to maintain adequate funding for your transportation needs. The other bad is that, as I think you all know at this point, the counties got hit with another cost share. This happened at the very end of session. Nancy and I spent a lot of time talking to the author of this, but ultimately you will be paying 18% of the cost for the Min Choices program that for individuals at risk for going into nursing homes provides an assessment as to what services they need and that can possibly keep them out of nursing homes and within the community. Another disappointment was there was no further investment in the METS, or Minnesota Eligibility Technology System. That's a system that determines people's qualification and continued qualification for medical assistance that requires your social services staff to spend hours of manual workarounds. Finally, and this is really long-term, I think the most challenging one is that in order to balance the budget in the medical assistance program, the state dipped into its Healthcare Access Fund, which has historically funded the MinCare program to the tune of about $390 million in this current biennium. As a result of that, and the fact that the tax that supports this fund, the 2% provider tax, will expire at the end of 2019, the balance of that account shrinks from $1.1 billion to $4 million. And so consequently, at the end of this 4-year period, there's going to be a hole where where's the legislature going to come up with the funding for medical assistance. This next chart goes into that in a little bit more detail. And finally, as you probably obviously know, this is probably going to be compounded at what happens at the federal level. Most of you probably know, the Senate did act today to begin debate on the possible repeal, replacement, they don't exactly know what they're doing, of the Affordable Care Act. But a consistent component of that has been reductions in federal funding for Medicaid, which is our medical assistance. So we're going to be facing big challenges in the future. I'll finally conclude with the ugly. Again, you probably all know this. Governor Dayton, at the conclusion of the special session, line item vetoed the appropriation for both the House of Representatives and the Senate. That has been challenged in court since I authored this. The district court has acted to say that his veto was illegal, but that is in the process of being appealed. I think the bottom line is it's going to be resolved one way or another, but it is engendering some hard feelings. With that, unless there are questions, I'm going to turn things over to Nancy.
Thank you, Keith.
You'll be back at the end?
Sure.
All right, thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. I'm Nancy Selesky, and I do Public Health and Human Services for MICA. And it's a pleasure being here. Is this working?
Yep.
Very good.
Okay. I would start by just saying that 2017 was fairly chaotic. We started right out after the first of the year, and they set rather aggressive deadlines, if you will, and we were pretty much flying until the end of May. Even with those deadlines, however, they went into overtime, as you know. So it was busy. In terms of human services, health and human services, when compared to the forecasted growth, we took huge hits on those programs. Keith just illustrated that. He also illustrated that they backfilled it with the Healthcare Access Fund. And again, this is significant because the provider tax does go away at the end of 2019. So that again is what funds Minnesota Care. There's been some discussion on and off about extending the provider tax, but at this point or at this stage, the current majority does not seem willing to look at doing that. In terms of the final deal, a number of MICA priorities were included. Pending federal approval, we will be allowed to provide certain case management through ITV services, through technology. Again, this is pending federal approval. There's also limits on what we can do. The person has to be in a facility that is staffed 24/7. It has to be appropriate for the client, for the provider, for the county. It has to be written into the person's case plan, and no more than 50% of the required face-to-face visits can be done through this measure of technology. Again, pending federal approval, counties will have the ability to access MA coverage for community-based service coordination at pre-booking. This is a situation where an officer has detained somebody, brought them into the facility. Social services has the option of being at the facility, and this is for folks that are presenting a mental health issue generally. With the permission of law enforcement, social services would be able to write up a plan for the client and be able to follow that client to make sure that they are complying with the plan. If they don't comply, then law enforcement would be free to pick them back up again. The legislature put $2 million per biennium into mental health innovation grants. This represents partial funding that the state receives from us, from counties, cost shares relative to the Anoka Metropolitan Regional Treatment Center and community behavioral health hospitals. Those dollars currently go into the general fund, and this would redirect some of those dollars to grants that will be used to build and expand local options. Community services will be able to share limited data with education, Head Start, and health provider partners with the idea of coming to positive outcomes for our clients. At the same time, the client has continued protection under HIPAA and the Minnesota Health Records Act. The legislature did fund a number of the governor's priorities. The main one was early childhood. They put $50 million per biennium into early childhood. They also put dollars into improved staffing for the Minnesota Security Hospital at St. Peter. They invested money in safe harbor for sexually exploited youth, substance use disorder reform, and mental health. Unfortunately, despite a rather healthy surplus, we did pick up a cost shift. Keith talked about that. That's the Minnesota Choices assessment tool. It's intended to streamline assessments for those folks whose situation is not likely to change. Nevertheless, we got up, it'll be an 18% cost to counties in July of 2019. Under the legislation, DHS is to work with counties to modify the assessment tool to reduce assessment times, as well as reducing the frequency and depth of the assessment. And again, this is for folks whose situations will not change or are unlikely to change. In terms of public health, the local public health grant was maintained. There was no cut, no increase. The MA reimbursement rate is increased to a minimum of $140 for evidence-based nurse home visiting. There was a lot of discussion, and you've all seen it in the press, about opioid abuse. A lot of discussion. The legislature did adopt a number of policy issues. Also tied to that was the statewide health improvement program, the SHIP fund. They did fund that at the $35 million, but they included language that says at least 2 grants need to go to opioid prevention, abuse prevention. They put $12 million into home visiting for pregnant teens, $5 million into a public health response contingency fund. This was in response to the measles outbreak as well as tuberculosis. The final bonding bill also includes $1 million for safe routes to schools. What didn't happen, I'll just highlight a couple. Keith talked about the MET system, the Minnesota Eligibility Technology System. That was a huge county priority for all of the county organizations, and in the end, they just did not increase that. It could have been worse. At one point, the House had wiped out all $40 million for that purpose, for the MET's purpose. Tied to this is periodic data match. Effective next year, April of 2018, we need to take a subset of our clients and ensure that they're indeed still eligible for public programs. A couple of other things, mental health, I mentioned there was money put in the Human Services bill there. There was a rather large proposal at one time that Senator Senchum had in the bonding bill. It was like $80 million for housing and support for mental health. That did not make it into the final bonding bill. Since he's the chair and this is a priority of his, we expect that we'll see that again probably next year if there's a bonding bill. Also, lots of discussion about closing down MNsure and transitioning to the federal exchange. That did not happen. The wage increase for individuals working in home and community-based services, that's an annual thing that comes up every year. Such a large expenditure, that just didn't happen either. So in closing, I would say the legislature favored a number of innovative projects that we brought forward. But again, we're disappointed that we ended up with a cost shift. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Not a question, but a comment and something that I think we all need to follow up on. The NACO publication, do you receive the NACO little newspaper that comes out once a month, I believe? Anyway, state of North Dakota. Now, I know North Dakota is a much smaller state and everything, but they are taking back the human service functions from counties. think it's something that we need to watch and see how that pans out. And it's disturbing that our legislators, and you can identify with this, is that they seem to become very specialized in the committees that they serve on. Unlike a county board, we have to be generalists at many areas. They specialize. And several of them spoke and we were appreciative of the increase in county program aid, but then these cost shifts far take those dollars away plus. But that doesn't seem to register with their thought process. So we need to work on that somehow. But let's watch North Dakota, and I think there was maybe some other state considering that. It was in the NACO newspaper that came out about a week ago.
I'll follow up with that. Thank you, Commissioner.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Steve Novak. I handle transportation issues for MICA. Always good to be in Winona County. I would like to just give you a review of what happened and what didn't happen in transportation in the last year. When I was here a year ago, we had a discussion, and the big news was that the Republican House and the DFL Senate had agreed publicly on the size and scope of the transportation infrastructure funding crisis in Minnesota, and they pegged the problem at $6 billion over 10 years. The bill that actually did pass doesn't get us where we need to be, but it is a start. It's also important to remember that after a lot of discussion and a long session, at the end of the regular session, there was no transportation bill and there was no capital bonding bill. Both of those things got completed during the 4-day special session. With that in mind, let me just highlight some of the things that did happen and try to explain the dynamics of what you'll be looking at in 2018. First and foremost, in terms of new money, there was $235 million provided for roads and bridges, $71 million that was dedicated to transit in the metropolitan area. And then, as Keith mentioned, the big winner was the trunk highway system, $940 million over 4 years from trunk highway bonds. $330 million of that is dedicated to the Corridors of Commerce program. In addition, for the first time, there's a $75 fee for all electric cars. And there's a mandate of a 15% reduction in the cost of operating within MnDOT around the state. The big change, I guess, was in the area of the sales tax proceeds from leased vehicles. That's been a program in place since the 2008 transportation package, and it had dedicated 50% of the money for roads and bridges in 5 suburban counties, and the other 50% for Greater Minnesota Transit, as an example, transit in Winona, after the first $32 million, which stayed with the state. So the change that was made does a couple of things. First and foremost, all of the money now, including the first $32 million, will be spent on transportation. 38% will go to roads and bridges in the 5 suburban counties, and 38% to Greater Minnesota Transit. That translates, or will translate, to a slight increase in funding in the next biennium for Greater Minnesota Transit. In addition to that now, though, 13% of the money is dedicated to a new Minnesota State Transportation Fund, which is essentially a local bridge program, and that's going to provide an extra $25 million for local bridges. And then 11% to the Highway User Tax Distribution Fund. So when all is said and done, in that category of money, there'll be some increases there for Winona. The big issue, I guess, that needs to be highlighted is that over the last 3 years, there's been, frankly, a political dispute, a policy political dispute between the Republican House, the Democratic Senate, and the Democratic governor over how to proceed on a statewide transportation funding bill. And the governor and the Senate basically had held a position that we should be increasing the traditional sources of constitutionally dedicated money, vis-a-vis gas tax license fee increases. The long and the short of it is that position lost out to the House position, which was being argued from their perspective that we should start to transfer general funds into transportation. And that position did prevail in this session of the legislature. And it was focused on, in particular, one new provision, which was to dedicate the sales taxes on auto parts to transportation. What's interesting about the net result of all of that is that if you did that in total, if you took the sales tax on auto parts and dedicated all of those revenues to transportation, it would be $307 million. In other words, you'd be halfway to your goal of $600 million a year. But instead, when all was said and done, after all of the amending and the differences of negotiations between the House and the Senate and the governor, $63 million was what was actually transferred from the component of sales tax on auto parts to transportation. So that policy change has now effectively happened, although at a percentage of what the total would be, and leaves open the question for the 2018 session of whether or not we want to pass constitutional dedication as it relates to this provision, or whether or not we're going to continue with statutory provision and go year to year determining how much will be transferred to transportation, but that change was made. Separate from budgetary cash dollars and so forth, we had the passage of a capital bonding bill, and within the bonding bill, $116 million went to the local road improvement program, and $49 million for local bridges. In addition to the 49 is the $25 million that I mentioned earlier in the presentation. So we've got about $74 million there for bridges. There was action taken on 4 or 5 other significant transportation issues. I'll just briefly mention those. The legislature and the governor did allow for an increase 10% on truck weights into categories of milk trucks and construction materials, which was basically aggregate materials, those kinds of things. The mowing and haying issue, which I think everybody spent a little bit of time on some months back, was resolved for the next year in terms of a moratorium administered by MnDOT. We sat through a lot of hearings on railroad crossing safety, and in the end, there were some major provisions passed in that area and some state funds that are applied towards helping to solve that problem around the state. There was the issue of turnbacks, and at one point, the Senate had a provision that would have disrupted current laws that relates to turnbacks pretty significantly. The House of Representatives' position was to keep status quo, which I think most counties wanted, and in the end, that provision did prevail. And then finally, there were a number of hearings on a number of bills that would have authorized MnDOT to do a significant number of studies. But in the end, there were 3 or 4 that I want to mention that did actually become law. They will be doing a study on the impact of highway construction costs around the state, a study on min-pass lanes, and a study on the turnback issue. So above and beyond that, I would conclude, except to say and sort of repeat what Keith had said earlier, is that it does sort of highlight the importance of at least providing options to counties through the 2013 bill that gives county boards the ability to utilize, if they choose, a wheelage tax and or a sales tax for the purpose of transportation funding. And to point out that the significant changes and upgrades in the computers at the DPS are finally going to be completed. And as a result of that, when you go into 2018 as a county board, if you choose on the wheelage tax, you will have new options that would provide the opportunity for you to pick any rate you want between $0 and $20. And then lastly, I just want to say that it's a pleasure working with Dave Kramer, your county engineer. We have monthly meetings. He's a regular attender. He contributes a lot, and we enjoy working with him. He does a great job.
Thank you.
So I would conclude. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Good. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Get out of Winona County before the bridges fall in. Be careful how you go.
Good evening. I almost said good morning like you did. Good evening, Mr. Chair and members. Ryan Erdman. I cover corrections and public safety issues for MICA. A few quick things. I'll make it pretty brief. Keith had already mentioned increases in funding at the DOC, something we watch closely for on the probation side. There was funding for the felony supervision, some additional agents. I'm not sure where they're going to be placed around the state, but there was also funding for the CPO reimbursement, even though you're not a CPO county. That's the funding mechanism whereby there's some reimbursement for your contract for the DOC for the juvenile and misdemeanor supervision. So there's a 3.6% increase. It's a relatively small dollar amount, frankly, but it is one of the largest increases in percentage terms we've seen in probably a couple of decades. So hopefully that'll provide some relief in terms of the cost of that contract and the state reimbursement portion there. One of the other funding things we look for in public safety was additional funding for the disaster aid contingency account. This was an account created about 3 years ago. Counties were heavily involved in the creation of that account, the emergency managers in particular. And that account allows for the state match for federally declared disasters without a special session. It also allows some counties that don't quite meet the federal threshold to draw down disaster aid dollars. We were seeking $20 million for that account. In the end, there was not sufficient funding to provide any money. However, they did get a little creative and put some language in place that if there's a fund balance from the end of the fiscal year, which hasn't been determined, though it ended at the beginning of this month, of $10 million or more, then that balance will be transferred to the disaster aid account. Everybody was optimistic that was going to be the case. I was optimistic that was going to be the case, though recently I've heard some interviews that suggest that income tax collections have been down the last few months, so it's kind of not clear. I'm not the right person to tell you if that's really going to happen or not, but hopefully we'll see some additional aid in that account. In part, a county-supported provision that added rural utility cooperatives to eligible recipients from that fund did pass. Like I said, the counties did support that. It's consistent with the way federal law treats disaster aid, but obviously creates more people drawing money from the fund, so all that much more reason that we need to increase that fund. If the fund balance situation is not remedied and doesn't allow for that transfer, if we have too many more disasters this summer, we may be looking at a special session because the balance is getting low there. On the policy side, a few other relatively small things I'll mention. The counties worked on the Sheriff's Association and the Department of Corrections had sort of a continuous quality improvement joint effort related to the conveyance fee that sheriffs are paid when folks are taken to prison. That should provide actually a much more streamlined process and perhaps some increased reimbursements for that process. We did encounter an issue related to liability for those on sentenced to service crews, whether or not those injuries, any injuries are the state's responsibility or the county's responsibility. We'd kind of been operating under an assumption that it was the state's responsibility, and some clearly were, but there were some others that maybe were not. So we clarified that any and all injuries for STS will be a state responsibility. So another positive one there. And then in the omnibus public safety bill, they dealt with one pretty tangential for us, but it'll get to my next topic, issue related to driver's licenses for undocumented immigrants. And they ended up doing that in the public safety bill, making that currently is not allowed. It's not allowed by rule. And what the legislature did is they took that rulemaking authority away from DPS. So it'll have to be the legislature that changes that, should it ever change. The reason they did that in public safety is that it gotten wrapped up in the Real ID situation with allowing you to get in federal facilities and on plane flights and so forth. A very interesting dynamic watching the Senate with a 34-33 majority, a number of Republican senators who were not in favor of Real ID under any circumstances due to data sharing with the feds and so forth, meaning they had to have Democrats in order to pass a Real ID bill, and you get a controversial immigration issue in there, pretty soon you got no bill. So they took that out, the bill passed. DPS will be issuing Real IDs starting it must be by October 1st, and it may actually be sooner in 2018. The federal extension has been applied for. Everyone's assuming that we're going to get it. They're very confident that we'll be getting the extension, which will put the final drop dead date on needing a Real ID out to mid-year 2020. So it gives us some time and gives us about half the folks in the state a chance to get a Real ID just in their normal driver's license renewal cycle. There were no additional fees authorized for the real ID driver's licenses, so we're going to have to take a very close look at how that plays out with your deputy registrars, with our deputy registrars at counties. Is there going to be an increased workload in terms of determining and verifying the documentation that goes with the real ID or not? If there is, there's no fee on the backside, so that's a cost that's going to fall to us. So we're going to have to kind of watch that carefully. If everybody's very well educated and they come in with all the right documents and everything goes smoothly, which we know probably won't happen, but if it does, that's not going to be a particularly more timely process than it is currently. So hopefully that's the case, but we'll have to be watching that to make sure we don't have a significant negative fiscal impact on our county deputy registrars from that implementation. But the good news is, you'll be able to continue getting on airplanes without special documentation. Your driver's license will do the trick. So that was pretty quick, high-level highlights, but it's really kind of the key things we were watching. If there's questions or something I didn't touch on that you'd like to hear more about, I'd be happy to take questions.
I have a question on what they're terming now as treatment courts. We got into this just a month or so ago about funding. So, and I do read a little something. So did they increase the funding or?
There was an increase in funding. And do you have an existing treatment court here now?
Yes, we have drug court.
Yeah, and so the one of the things that
just where I'm asking, I guess, is we got that started and funded by a federal grant. Now we need to depend on the state to help run that.
Right, so that's the good news. Is one of the things the state was looking at. The new money is for continuation grants. It is not to fund new courts. And one of the things the court had done that had some national consultants in, they're looking at more of a formula-based approach, kind of a per capita on your drug court participants approach. And in order to not have any losers in that scenario, they needed a chunk of money, and that's what they requested, and that's what they got. So they're going to be going forward with continuation grants, implementing their new formula, but again, with the new money, that should be not any losers. So it's always kind of a little bit of a shifting target with the way that, there's federal funds, and then there's other federal funds, and then there's state funds, and then all your county funds. I mean, drug court funding is about the most complicated thing. You think it shouldn't be, but it is. But that should be a good news answer on that one.
Okay, all right, thank you.
If there's not anything else, I think Keith's going to wrap up. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Commissioner Ward, before we leave that question, I'll just tell you that we are working with the state courts to find out the actual allocation between the various districts and the various counties on the, so I've been corresponding with staff over at the court administration to find out what the allocation is. They've had a two-tier approval process and have yet to provide us with the actual distribution, but we will get that to your staff as soon as we receive that.
Good, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members, that does complete our presentation. I do want to thank Winona County for its continued membership and recognize both Commissioner Pomeroy and Commissioner Ward for representing you on our board of directors. Also want to thank your staff. It's already been mentioned, several of your staff have been mentioned in the course of your presentation. All of your staff participate in our staff committees, and their input in both sharing how your county does it, possibly more efficiently or more effectively than our other member counties do, as well as assisting us in putting together our legislative platform and advancing it, is great assistance. With that, I'll conclude. Be happy to answer any final questions or any final comments.
Thank you, Keith.
Okay, thank you very much.
You bet.
So how many people are going to sign up to run for governor?
Well, Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Ward, we were just talking about that at dinner. I believe we have 8 candidates now over on the Democratic side. Certainly there's possibility of more. We just had an announcement yesterday that Keith Downey, former representative from Medina and former state Republican chair, has now joined the field. There's several non-politicians that are running for the position on the Republican side, so I can't provide you the exact number. We couldn't come up with it in our discussions, but there are at least 3 legislators who are running for it, and we believe there are several other non-legislator or other non-office holders who are running for the position as well.
To say that there's lots of interest.
There's lots of interest. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a great
Thank
night.
you.
Next, we have Mr. Bamanek presenting his mid-year report for the Recorder's Office.
Good evening again, and thank you. We're having some, a little bit like the legislature, but not nearly that, chaotic. Some unusual, but yet very interesting days with real estate. And probably the big issue is that we have lots of buyers, but we have very, very little that is listed for sale. And for an example, this past week, about 70 residential properties are available. The norm is 355 to 375. I talked to a couple that were in town for the weekend to find a home. They're moving from Rochester. They spent the whole weekend. They said they didn't see a home in the price range that they're authorized. They looked at everything imaginable. Most of it was more than they could budget for, and they just didn't find anything. And this isn't an isolated case anymore. We're hearing more and more of that. So the next thing I'm going to tell you is that our sales for the first half of the year are just about identical to last year. Now you're going to say, well, then that's no big deal. Well, with the shortage of properties we have, I think we're extremely positive to be at the same as 16. We had choices then, today we don't. So I wonder how long that keeps going. People that have an interest in selling a home, if they've taken fairly good care of it and it's presentable, it's going to be sold the first or second day it's listed. We had one home not too far from here that by noon the first day, 12 different parties had gone through the home. So there is a lot of interest, and it doesn't seem like we have very much availability. All right, sales in all price ranges except the very top tier were up during the second quarter. So we started out with what I thought was a really good first quarter, and the second quarter was went beyond that. The most expensive home that sold for the second quarter was a $410,000 home, a little bit west of Lewiston in Utica Township, and the second high was in Valley Oaks, Winona, for $399,000. Just below the top tier, the $300,000 and above, we had some really positive increases in activity. Sales from $150,000 to $300,000 really jumped up. And, at this point, you wonder if people were moving up because there wasn't anything below that, or if they just really were finding what they were looking for. I think there's just with some of the activity, there's questions. I've been participating in the housing study that the city of Winona initiated, and was there primarily to provide information from the county. And this coming Thursday, there's a meeting coming up, and they asked for some additional detail on the residential properties that were sold so far this year. So I put a couple of sheets of some of that information in the handout for you. I just want to mention real quickly our 2017 sales by quarter. First quarter we had 115, which was very good for wintertime. And then the second quarter just completed 184. It's kind of an interesting aspect of this to look at the sale prices in comparison with the county market value. And during the wintertime, sales 59% over county market value. The last group, second quarter, 65% over. So I think that also reflects on the willingness and the demand of buyers. I think we're seeing some increases in sale prices. The 2017 sales by location for the first half of the year, about half are usually in the city of Winona. The numbers we have tonight are running a little higher than that. First quarter, 62 in the city of Winona. That was 54%. But we got to the second quarter, just completed 112 and 61% of the sales. Very, very heavy in the city of Winona. St. Charles and Goodview, second quarter, St. Charles had 15, Goodview had 12. The rest of the sales were spread throughout the county and the townships and the small cities. There's always questions and an interest. Where are those top sales? And they also are spread for the first half of the year. This second quarter, Winona had 4, Goodview 1, St. Charles 1, Wilson Township 2, and then in Utica and Warren, each had 1. One of the things that we're always looking at is where are the sales, and for as long as anyone can remember, the majority of our sales in any given quarter are usually in the 100 to 150,000 range, and that was the case in the second quarter. But when you look at the numbers that were provided, we saw some real upswings between the first quarter and second quarter in some of those more expensive homes. The exception again was on the top. But I'll just take one that's kind of interesting here: 200 to 250,000. We had 12 in the first quarter. We had 23 in the second quarter. That's a pretty good increase. And if we go either one in back of it or one in front of it, you'll see some pretty significant number increases. We have a little bit of an upward movement in sale prices, and I think that we saw that during the second quarter. We've got the end of July coming up, and in June we had an unprecedented day, June 30th. We knew it was going to be busy, but again, just hearing that people are looking, there just isn't much available. How are we going to go up in numbers? But we sure did June 30th and what was recorded that day. So I'm looking at this Friday with wonder on how many transactions we're going to have. All right, I wanted to switch to 2017 land sales just quickly and bring a few things up. We've had 23 land sales in 2017, and that's a pretty neat number because last year at this time we only had 16, and the group of 16, it really didn't tell a story. It was a really mixed group of sales, hard to take 2 or 3 and find much for similarities, so it really left a lot of question about what was being paid for hillsides, what was being paid for good tillable land. We just didn't have a whole lot of insight. It's a little bit different tonight, although the numbers are not by any means enough to make any firm statements. But we have 3 sales of woods and hillsides. They're in Pleasant Hill and New Hartford Township, so they certainly aren't across the county. But they are land only and no improvements. 3 parcels, 24 acres, 45 acres, 77 acres. They had a price range of $25.65 to $36.71 per acre, an average of $28.50. And that is about $350 an acre above what the county is presently valuing those kinds of properties for. So it looks like there is, at least for the second quarter, some pretty positive interest in our hillsides and woods. All right, we had a little bit better number, 7 land-only sales with all or a very high percentage tillable land. These range from 25 to 140 acres. They were located in Wilson, Fremont, Saratoga, and St. Charles Townships. It's the western part of the county, but that's also the area where the majority of the cropland is. Price range was $5,000 to $64.72 an acre. Average was $58.06. More sales definitely are needed to make a firm statement, but there is some thought that there's recent sales that are suggesting a little softer tillable land price and maybe a little higher price for woods and hillsides. The second half sales, in particular those from November 15th to the end of the year, probably will tell more of the story, but some of that time period's a ways off. I want to just mention commercial sales real quickly. It's following the other 2 areas, not many listed for sale, but they still seem to be selling and coming in. Commercial sales during the first half of 17 up very sharply compared to 16. There have been 41 this year, 23 last year. Dollar-wise, 2016 was nearly twice the dollars that we have for this far in 2017. Primary reason, last year there were 5 sales that were significantly over $1 million each, and that kind of dollar amount adds up. About 9.7 million this year, 17.9 million last year. At this point, apartments and student housing were the largest area of sales so far this year, 14 sales compared to 4 like that in 16. During both years, a wide variety of sales from general office to manufacturing. Okay, any questions? A little bit of an overview. Basically, a lot of activity, and it's not centered on one area of real estate. There is dynamic interest in all areas. We've had more people at our office asking if there is anyone they can talk to find out where there may be some land for sale or if there is a house for sale. And of course, we're always suggesting realtors, and they say they know them all. I wanted to share 2 other things with you, if I could, real quickly. In our office, this really seems trivial in some respects, but if I could just tell you the amount of time that I spent the last 3 years and how thrilled I am that we've accomplished what I think is something that should just be an everyday policy, but it's taken a lot more than that. We determine and collect several fees and special taxes, and they're related to real estate sales. Each fee and each tax has a portion of it that goes to the state of Minnesota. And those are all different amounts, percentages, dollar amounts. And each one of these accounts, when we record a document, has to have a separate check. So with all of the different fees, we can easily have 3, 4 different checks for a transaction. And you know, with the computer programs we have, I mean, we can't take one check and get this figured out. But that turned out to be a huge question. And we started with the state auditors and we worked our way back. And we finally got here, and thanks to help from our Winona County auditor, Sandra, from Ken, Green, Pat, all the people that are here tonight, we all worked on this. And finally, a month ago, I was able to tell our users that we will be able to accept one check for all the fees. We got a call from one of the largest banks in Winona the next morning and said, "Thank you, it's about time." And I agree. And I am very proud. I mean, it's way overdue, but I'm very proud to let you know tonight that there's this piece of efficiency that we've finally been able to bring to the process. But the other part of it is, and it was a part we didn't spend a lot of time on, one of the lenders and a couple of the law offices told me that, "Bob, these are commercial account checks. We pay a fee for each check we write. When you're having us write 2, 3, 4, and not me, but the state of Minnesota, we're spending a lot of money on that transaction." Well, they're having a good day too, because now one check covers it. So I'm just proud to bring you that bit of efficiency news tonight, and thank everybody that put the time in on it. All right, and the one last thing is, I'm really proud that next month, August 9th, we're going to be having a regional recorders meeting here with our partners, and that's a whole variety of people that meet with us and talk over processing and how we can better work together and work within our offices. And I would like to invite each one of you. And it's going to be just a really neat place that we don't often get to in Winona County. It's the Garvin Heights Winery and Event Center. And they have a beautiful building that was constructed just a short time ago, and it can accommodate a meeting, and I'm really thrilled and looking forward to having it. And to kind of top off the day, the Dairy Princess has agreed to come and do strawberry sundaes for everyone attending for the new dessert. So I left you the information.
I'm the Dairy Princess. I was a candidate once.
Yes. I left you the information on the table here, and I'm sure hoping that you'll be there. Our Dairy Princess right now is Leah Brozick, and I think they are third generation in the dairy business, long time Winona Dairy Farm. So I'm really pleased that the Dairy Princess will be there and just add to our program. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bob.
Thanks, Bob.
Thank you.
The next item is
Just a quick question.
not here yet. Okay.
Just a quick question, Bob. So that gain in efficiency of one check to cover all the fees, are other counties going to be able to access, or have we kind of helped process that? I mean,
Some of it has to do with their structure. I believe that there may be a couple that are doing it, and I think that we pointed to that when we were going through the process. I think the door is open. We're dealing with laws that were written so long ago, and they do not take into account the processing that we do today, especially the numbers. Where years ago you had all kinds of time to dwell on something, today it's move and just hope at the end of the day we've done the best job that we can.
Yeah, well, good.
So
So
much.
if you
Thank you very
can
much.
share that with some others, that would be good.
Yes, and we do have some interesting topics coming up at our meeting. We've got a legislative update from Representative Pulowski as it pertains to our area of work. The Bar Association has an update for us. We're going to be dealing with property splits, some discussion there. So there's a lot that fits. And we probably will also be talking just briefly about the legislative proposal that passed this year that had been before the legislature for the last several years. We now have authority to implement an ordinance that requires property transfers that are a split to be approved by the planning department before recording. Time limit is 2 days, but it authorizes that ability for all the governmental units in Winona County, meaning the cities for the incorporated areas and the county for the unincorporated. And it looks like we want to work together very closely because this looks like fragmentation. Okay, thank you.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Next item is 7.4, discuss and appoint members to the Workforce Development Board.
The Workforce Centers is requesting that we, the county board, appoint or reappoint the members and then add one member to their the Workforce Development Board. The county board's responsibility each year is to appoint the members.
Okay.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion by Commissioner Olson, seconded by Commissioner Kavesi to appoint the individuals presented within the agenda item to the Workforce Center Board. Commissioner Ward.
Question. How long are these appointments for?
My understanding it's a year.
1 year? Okay. And these people that are currently serving?
Yes.
Okay. So is this going to be a committee that we would put on our, annually we look for citizen volunteers? Or is this treated differently?
No, it's treated differently. There's a certain makeup for that particular Workforce Development Board, requires certain kinds of, from industry, from different education, there's certain specific requirements, and the board handles all of its own recruiting and recommending appointments.
Okay. The reason I bring up is that I think most of everybody here and the organizations and everything it's heavily city Winona orientated versus Winona, and this is a Winona County Workforce Board, correct?
Yes, yes.
So I'm not sure if that is what we want. If we don't want, I do see it is a Winona County Workforce Board, not a Winona City.
Workforce
It
Development
doesn't
Board.
actually say that.
No, but I'm just saying, if you look at the list and look at the
Yeah, they do represent.
businesses, yes, we do have a Craig Porter and Plastics is from Lewiston, but is there anything from the city of St. Charles?
I think that if someone was interested in serving on the Workforce Development Board, that they would contact them, and the board can consider their appointment at some point in the future.
Workforce Investment Board.
Okay, and then the other question is, so the county board member, should that be included on this list?
No, there's no county board member representative on there. Greg is considered the local elected official. Commissioner Olson was appointed that some time ago and represents the county board.
Right, so I guess
As a non-voting member.
Yeah, you don't get a vote.
Right.
And is
And
it,
I'm not sure.
seriously, we don't have a,
It's a separate entity, and I mean, we can get more information if you'd like it from the board itself, but it's structured under from the federal Workforce Development Board to the state Workforce Development Board, and then this is an entity unto it. Why they include the county in that process. It's a I'll call it a formality, but it's part of the structure. You appoint the board, but the board has all kinds of rules in how it can be appointed. And in the past, it's always operated on its own, independently of the county board, basically.
Commissioner Jacob?
So is this annually, we've appointed, as collectively as a board, we've appointed you to this position, Greg? Is
I
that?
think that's all we've done.
Yeah.
I think it's on that Maureen
It's on our-
might know, but I believe
It's on our
the
yearly
list.
appointment.
The list of annual appointments, that's Greg,
Yeah.
or Commissioner Olson. And then
Yes.
this, although I don't know that this has ever been brought before the board to appoint these individuals, but since there was a change in leadership over there, and we've been going through the rules and kind of making sure we're covering all the bases and so forth, Deed recommended that we go ahead and start the appointment process each year through the county board. So really, this is the first time, at least in the 2 years I've been here, that we appointed these board members. And in the past, for some reason, that they hadn't gone through that process.
I'm sure this is the perfect makeup, but it is a little bit odd that, I mean, I could have a citizen come to me and say, hey, how come these people all got appointed without me having a chance to apply for that position?
Yeah, and that's something we can talk to the Workforce Development Board about and Deed in the future. This is basically the operating group as it is right now, with the exception of that one individual. I think as we move forward, maybe that's something I can talk to them about and see how they want to run that process.
How do they select these people and reappoint them presently?
That's my point is, in the past, these people have been on the board for a long time. They've operated without doing that, I guess is the best way to put it, for some time at least. So
Commissioner Wood?
Yeah.
it should have gone, according to the WIOA rules, the county board should be approving this every year, approving the membership.
So I would ask maybe that we get some, we can appoint them and then we get some additional information and maybe it's just our error or something, but when we look at our 2017 Winona County Board appointments to boards and committees, we have it listed, and I don't know if this makes any difference, Minnesota Workforce Council. And then
It's gone under a number
Development
of different
Board.
iterations
Yeah.
of the name, Workforce Investment Board. The current one is Workforce Development Board, but that's not an issue. It's just gone through a number of different names over the years.
Do we give them money? Or does this come from Deed?
No, this is where the county became the fiscal agent.
Right.
Okay.
Change some things, right?
Yeah, the fiscal agent. So we basically process the checks. The money comes to us, and we send it to them. There's a
It's
number.
not local property tax dollars. It's Deed.
No, it's
Deed.
well, it's different programs, but it's not local property tax dollars. Yeah, there are contracts with we have a contract. The county does with Deed to provide what they call a one-stop shop operator. They provide all the training. The Workforce Development Board kind of oversees that. And we also have an agreement with Deed as a master agreement for that Workforce Development Board. There's other contracts, they call them income contracts, which are basically agreements for like the youth training program. That you'll be seeing those kind of things come to the county board. In the past, we hadn't done that because we weren't the fiscal agent. Deed had been operating as the fiscal agent, and that's what they divested themselves of that last year and wanted the county to take that over. We'll also Southeast Tech has decided, or has graciously agreed to provide the administrative oversight for the county board, not the county board, the Workforce Development Board, and we need to work up an agreement with them as well for that piece of it. The way the administration and the fiscal agent's funded is there's a percentage of the grants that the county can keep and use for those administrative functions. The rest of the money just flows through the county to the actual training programs. So yeah, it's nothing to do with our tax levy or any money that we get from that perspective. We do have a separate contract with Deed that's through the Workforce Development Committee for the MFIB program over in Community Services. So there's a training program there, a family investment program, I think it's called, and that contract also went through the county board as well. So you're going to see a few things that are probably a little different than the past because the county board wasn't the fiscal agent and the county board hadn't been making those appointments that should have probably been made.
Did you have another question?
Well, now you, Ray, if is there a conflict of interest there? We are the fiscal agent, and we're appointing people to do the business.
Yeah, there's no conflict.
Okay.
That's the way they want to structure it. That's the way Deed asked that it be structured.
Commissioner
Okay.
Jacob.
So first of all, is this time sensitive if this board was not appointed tonight, but the following meeting?
No.
Are they struggling to function?
No, this is something we wanted to clean up for this year.
Okay.
So that we could then move on to the next year and get a regular
I
pattern.
guess so the bigger part of my question then is, I've been on church boards that I can't get off.
Yeah.
And these people are being appointed by a county board, and I haven't had any information on any of these people, whether they even want the jobs.
They all applied to be on the board. They
applied
all
recently?
Yes, they all reapplied. I didn't provide their individual applications because it includes personal information. We didn't want to put that in the packet. But we do have an application from all of the members asking to be reappointed.
Okay, but I think into the future, it should be open. It should be open, just like, I mean, I understand we're taking it over, these people are on the board, so I'd support this motion, but.
They do have their separate bylaws that they have to go by.
Yeah, and I'll have to do some research and find out how the two would interface.
It would be really odd that we would have the authority if it's their bylaws.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I
to appoint
understand.
them
Yeah.
to one of their
It's a
committees.
strange relationship. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And we have some learning curve here to go through. And when I said that the appointments for a year, it may well be for this fiscal year. And I don't know whether that's a state fiscal year or whether it's the county's fiscal year.
So if these applicants were allowed to make the application, it must have been open at some point for people to apply.
Well, no, what the county, we're at the Workforce Development Board did was basically go to the existing board members and ask them if they were interested in keeping their positions on the board. And my understanding, and Greg probably would know better than this, but it's, those people have been on that board for
Yeah, some have been on there for
a long time, yeah. And in the past, they've handled their own reappointments, so I don't know how that process worked, but they brought in other people when they needed to fill spots. But I don't have a history with them to know how they actually filled those spots.
When you look on the web page, Google is great.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
There are 16 local workforce development boards in Minnesota. We're one of the few that is just one
County.
county-wide.
Right.
Others are multiple counties.
Yes.
But it does say Winona County Workforce Investment Board. That's what
Okay.
it's technically
Yeah,
on the website. It doesn't have any information about how it's structured or what it's related to, as I think Administrator Fritz said about the feds and then the state and then the local. So it's through the U.S. Department of Labor.
Yeah, and I admit there's a learning curve involved, and if I think what we're asking for and what the Workforce Investment Board, when they start calling it, what they have on their website, I guess, is basically some breathing room to get all these things worked out. And if the county board is interested in looking at possibly opening up those appointments, I can broach that with the board and figure out how that works. You know, if it can work that way.
I definitely would, because I think, if it's county, it should be county-wide representation, and I don't see it as that. So
Yeah, so into the future, I would say that, but Greg's officially our liaison, right, at this point?
Yes.
And you're good with it, and Administrator Fritz, you're good with it?
Yeah, I think for continuity of the board, you wouldn't want to go through that process right now anyway, because we're in a really kind of a transition phase and trying to establish we'll call it the new entity and the new relationships. And if we were to open it up to everybody and put a bunch of new people on it, at least for the short term, it would really kind of make it difficult to manage.
Well, this isn't a list of all the members of it either.
It should have been, according to what Jerry gave me.
That's a pretty, I don't know, does that look right?
16 with
There's
yourself.
15 or 16.
What was that? Oh, Rich McCrude's on there, he's not on there.
Okay. Rich Mike's not on here.
So he must have been.
No, that's the EDA. He's not on this board.
Yeah, he is.
Yeah, I've seen him there.
EDA and this board?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Yeah, I'll have to ask Jerry if he missed one or something, because we went through the list and had him check it, so.
Jerry,
Craig, at the Workforce Investment Board
and he's an employee of the
of D.
okay.
Do you have a recommendation, Mr. Olson?
He approved, he made a motion.
Oh, okay.
Approved.
Did you second that motion, sir?
I think Marie.
Commissioner Kavesi seconded it.
All righty.
Just a point of should we say, to give ourselves a deadline, I mean, for what, through the end of 2018, being that we're already halfway through?
For this appointment round?
Yeah.
If
If
you
we're
want-
saying you
do you
need
want to
time to
clarify
get
it
some
that way?
stability and everything, and then, so we wouldn't do anything